I can't marry her, but as compensation, I will give her all of my devotion. That was the caption. Beneath those words was a softly filtered, intimately lit photograph of a 24-year-old girl, fast asleep, her cheek resting against the passenger seat of a car. It was a beautiful post, poetic, tragic, and completely invisible to the woman Tristan was actually supposed to marry in less than 2 months. Zoe stared at the screenshot glowing on her phone, the pale light reflecting in her dark, unblinking eyes. She had only seen the post because an intern had carelessly left their phone unlocked on a table earlier that evening. Tristan had restricted his privacy settings so perfectly that his fiancé was the only one in their entire social and professional circle who couldn't see his public declaration of emotional infidelity. The sheer audacity of it didn't make Zoe want to scream. It made her stomach churn, a physical manifestation of a 7-year illusion violently shattering into pieces. Just 3 hours ago, they had been at a loud, dimly lit downtown bar, celebrating the latest funding round for the biotech startup they had built from the ground up. The team, riding the high of cheap cocktails and shared success, had decided to play a messy game of truth or dare. When the bottle spun and pointed directly at Zoe, the table erupted in cheers. "Zoe, dare!" one of the senior researchers had hollered over the pulsing music. "Kiss the boss. 30 seconds. Give us a show." Zoe had smiled, a genuine, relaxed curve of her lips. She stood up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and turned toward the man she had loved since graduate school. But Tristan wasn't looking at her. He was entirely focused on the girl sitting to his left, Tessa, the new lab assistant. Tessa had her hands pressed over her ears, her big doe eyes wide and supposedly overwhelmed by the loud music. She looked like a frightened fawn caught in the headlights of adulthood. And Tristan, the brilliant, commanding CEO, was leaning over her, gently rubbing her shoulder, murmuring something into her ear to soothe her delicate nerves. The table went dead silent. The cheers died in the colleagues' throats as they darted awkward, pitying glances toward Zoe. Zoe stood there, her smile slowly freezing into a brittle mask. She cleared her throat. "Tristan." Tristan finally looked up, his brow furrowed in mild irritation, as if Zoe had just interrupted a crucial boardroom meeting. "What is it? Can't you see Tessa is feeling a little claustrophobic?" "The dare, Tristan," someone muttered uncomfortably. Tristan let out a heavy sigh, the kind of exaggerated exhale a parent gives an annoying toddler. "Grow up, guys. We're not in college anymore." He turned his back to Zoe, pouring a glass of iced water and pressing it into Tessa's trembling hands. The penalty for refusing a dare was a straight shot of the cheapest, harshest tequila the bar had to offer. Without a word, Zoe reached across the sticky wooden table, picked up the shot glass, and threw it back. The liquid fire burned down her throat, instantly aggravating the chronic stomach ulcer she had developed from years of working 80-hour weeks to get their company off the ground. She gasped, doubling over slightly as a sharp, agonizing cramp seized her abdomen. Tristan glanced at her, his expression utterly devoid of empathy. "If you can't handle your liquor, Zoe, you shouldn't drink. Stop trying to act like one of the frat boys." Before Zoe could catch her breath, Tessa let out a soft, pathetic whimper. "Tristan, I think I need to go home. It's too loud, but my neighborhood is so dark at night." "I'll drive you," Tristan said instantly, already reaching for his coat. He looked at Zoe, who was now gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Take a cab, Zoe. Tessa lives in a sketchy area. I have to make sure she gets to her door safely. You're a big girl, you can manage." And just like that, he walked out. He left his fiancé in a bar full of whispering colleagues to play the knight in shining armor for a girl who couldn't pass a basic biology exam without hand-holding. Now, sitting in the pristine silence of her luxury apartment, the pain in Zoe's stomach was finally subsiding, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. She looked at the leather-bound wedding planner resting on the glass coffee table. Inside were the receipts for the florist, the caterer, the custom invitations, all paid for by her. Tristan had always claimed he was too busy being the visionary of their company to handle the mundane details of their life. He called Tessa an innocent child. He treated her like a fragile angel that needed protecting. But Zoe knew exactly what Tessa was. She was a mirror reflecting Tristan's own narcissism back at him. Tessa made him feel like a god. Zoe made him feel like a partner. And insecure men always preferred worship over equality. "I can't marry her." The words from his secret post echoed in her mind. He was playing the tragic martyr. He wanted the financial stability and intellectual powerhouse that Zoe provided. But he wanted the ego-stroking adoration of Tessa. He was stringing them both along, high on his own supply of self-righteousness. A lesser woman might have dissolved into a puddle of tears. A desperate woman might have confronted him, begging him to choose her. But Zoe was a scientist. When a scientist discovers a toxic anomaly in a controlled environment, they don't cry over it. They isolate the variable, and they eradicate it. She calmly deleted the screenshot from her phone, her manicured thumb hovering over the screen. The 7 years were gone. The love was dead. All that was left was the logistics of extraction. Suddenly, the absolute silence of the apartment was shattered by the sharp buzzing of her cell phone. Zoe glanced at the caller ID. It was Brenda, Tristan's mother. It was nearly midnight. Brenda never called this late unless she wanted money, a favor, or total control. Zoe took a slow, steadying breath and swiped the screen to answer. The words that came out of Brenda's mouth next would officially nail the coffin shut on this entire charade. "Zoe, you are still awake, right?" Brenda's voice crackled through the receiver, entirely devoid of the warmth one might expect from a future mother-in-law a month before a wedding. It sounded more like a bank manager calling in a bad loan. Zoe didn't bother offering a pleasantry. "Hello, Brenda. What is it?" There was a huff of irritation on the other end, followed by the clinking of ice in a glass. "Well, since you are obviously not busy planning, I need to talk to you about the downtown condo, your little bachelorette pad." Zoe's eyes narrowed slightly, zeroing in on the leather-bound planner. The condo wasn't a bachelorette pad. It was a sprawling 3-bedroom luxury property in the heart of the city that she had inherited from her late grandfather. It was worth more than Tristan's entire initial investment in their startup. "What about it?" Zoe asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Tristan and I were talking today," Brenda started, adopting that sickly sweet, patronizing tone she used whenever she was about to demand something outrageous. "Since you two are moving into the new house in the suburbs after the wedding, the condo is just going to sit there collecting dust, and frankly, the property taxes are exorbitant. It's an asset, Brenda, it appreciates. Which is exactly why you need to put it into the family trust, specifically under his brother's name." Brenda dropped the bomb with the casual entitlement of someone ordering a side salad. "Tommy hasn't been able to hold down a job since he dropped out of college. He needs a stable place to live, and honestly, he could use the equity to start a little business. Tristan agrees. It's the responsible thing for you to do as his new sister." Zoe sat perfectly still in the dark living room, the audacity of the demand washing over her like a bucket of ice water. Tristan hadn't even had the spine to ask her himself. He had sent his mother to do his dirty work. They wanted her inheritance to fund his deadbeat brother's lifestyle. They wanted her to buy her way into their family. Are you suggesting I sign over a multi-million-dollar property to Tommy? Zoe asked, the incredulity barely masked. I'm not suggesting it, Zoe. I'm telling you it's what families do, Brenda snapped, her sweet facade instantly crumbling. Tristan is a brilliant CEO. He's going to be wildly successful. He doesn't need a wife hoarding her assets like she's planning a divorce before the ink is even dry on the marriage license. You're 28, Zoe. You aren't getting any younger. If you want to walk down that aisle and officially become a Davis, you need to show you're fully committed. The threat hung in the air, heavy and blunt. Sign over the condo or the wedding is off. For years, Zoe had tolerated Brenda's passive-aggressive digs about her career, her independence, and her coldness. She had endured it because she loved Tristan. She had thought they were a team. She thought they were building an empire together. But looking at the screenshot she had just deleted and listening to the sheer greed vibrating through the phone line, Zoe realized she wasn't a partner. To the Davis family, she was a very convenient ATM machine with a high IQ attached. The silence stretched on for a moment too long. Zoe, did you hear me? Brenda barked. I have the trust documents drafted. I'll send them over tomorrow morning. You need to sign them before the rehearsal dinner. A small, genuine laugh bubbled up from Zoe's chest. It was a laugh completely devoid of humor, sharp and brittle, like breaking glass. Brenda, Zoe said softly, her tone shifting from polite to absolute zero. You can tell Tommy he's going to have to find another way to fund his life. And you can tell Tristan he doesn't need to worry about the property taxes. Excuse me, are you refusing? Do you understand what I just said? If you don't do this, there will be no wedding. Brenda's voice hit a shrill, hysterical pitch. Zoe stood up, walking toward the floor to ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. The city she had conquered on her own terms. The city she was not about to hand over to a mediocre man and his greedy family. I understand perfectly, Zoe replied, her voice steady and chillingly calm. I agree. The wedding is off. Don't call me again. Let us talk about the audacity of the marriage tax. Brenda doesn't see a future daughter-in-law. She sees a real estate portfolio with a pulse. In the past, women were socially conditioned to negotiate their own extortion to keep the peace. Maybe we can compromise. Let's talk to a financial planner. Number Zoe doesn't waste breath defending her grandfather's legacy to a woman acting like a glorified debt collector. She simply unplugs the machine. When a family treats your assets like a communal checking account before the ink is even dry on the marriage license, you don't haggle. You close the bank. Before Brenda could formulate a response, Zoe ended the call and blocked the number. The weight of a 7-year relationship didn't crush her. The impending social embarrassment of a canceled wedding didn't paralyze her. Instead, as she stood looking out over the city lights, Zoe felt an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of relief. The next morning, Zoe walked into the sleek, modern offices of their biotech startup exactly at 8 a.m. She looked impeccable. A tailored charcoal suit, sharp stilettos, and an expression that gave absolutely nothing. She needed to handle this surgically. If she blew up now, Tristan would play the victim. He would spin the narrative, telling their investors she was hysterical and unstable. She needed to extract her intellectual property before she dropped the bomb publicly. Tristan swaggered into the lab an hour late, holding 2 artisan coffees. He looked perfectly rested, completely unaware that his mother had essentially set his life on fire the night before. He didn't hand the second coffee to his fiancé. He walked straight past Zoe's desk and placed it on the workstation of the 24-year-old intern. Caramel macchiato, extra foam. Just how you like it, Tessa, Tristan said, his voice dropping into that sickeningly gentle register he reserved only for her. Tessa beamed, batting her lashes. Oh, Tristan, you remembered. You're the best boss ever. I was so exhausted after yesterday. You really saved me. Several colleagues nearby exchanged knowing smirks. One of the senior researchers, a sycophant named Mark, chuckled. Careful, Tristan. You're spoiling the kid. Tristan chuckled back, fully leaning into the role of the benevolent mentor. She's young, Mark. The startup world is brutal. Someone has to look out for her. Zoe watched the performance from her glass-walled office, her face a mask of polite indifference. She didn't feel a pang of jealousy. She felt disgust. It was pathetic how easily a mediocre man's ego could be inflated by a few wide-eyed stares and a high-pitched giggle. Tristan finally seemed to remember he had a fiancé. He strolled over to Zoe's office, leaning casually against the doorframe. Hey, stomach, feeling better? I told you not to drink that trash last night. He didn't apologize for leaving her. He didn't ask if she got home safe. I'm fine, Zoe said, her eyes fixed on her dual monitors, rapidly backing up her encrypted research files to a secure offshore server. Just busy, Tristan sighed, drumming his fingers against the glass. Right, always busy. Look, before you dive into whatever it is you're doing, come into my office. We need to finalize the paperwork for the new protein sequencing patent before the board meeting. Zoe paused her typing. This patent was her life's work. She had spent the last 3 years in this lab, missing holidays and surviving on protein bars to isolate the sequence that would secure their Series B funding. It was the crown jewel of the company. She stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. All right, let's finalize it. Zoe followed him into his spacious corner office. Tristan sat down behind his massive oak desk, opening a thick manila folder. He pulled out the final draft of the patent application and slid it across the desk toward her. I've already had legal review it, Tristan said casually, adjusting his expensive watch. Just need your sign-off on the contributor list so we can submit it to the patent office. Zoe picked up the document. Her eyes scanned the crisp white paper, moving past the technical jargon until she reached the section detailing the inventors. Her breath hitched, not in sorrow, but in absolute icy fury. Her name was listed second. The primary inventor, the name that would be credited with the multi-million-dollar breakthrough. The name that would headline medical journals and secure academic prestige for the rest of their career, was printed clearly at the top, Tessa Jenkins. Zoe slowly looked up from the paper, her dark eyes locking onto Tristan's smug, expectant face. The man she was supposed to marry in 30 days had just handed her life's work to his mistress as a participation trophy. What is this, Tristan? Zoe asked, her voice dropping an octave, dangerously quiet. Tristan didn't flinch. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. It's exactly what it looks like, Zoe. I am putting Tessa down as the lead inventor. Tristan Tessa couldn't correctly isolate a basic enzyme sequence without me hovering over her shoulder, Zoe stated, the paper held loosely in her manicured hand. She broke a centrifuge last week because she couldn't follow basic operating procedures. She didn't discover this protein. She didn't write a single line of this research. Zoe, calm down, Tristan interrupted smoothly, employing his signature gaslighting tactic, making the rational woman feel like an emotional wreck. It's just a name on a piece of paper. You're being petty. Petty? Yes, petty. He leaned forward, adopting the condescending tone of a disappointed parent. Look, we are getting married in 4 weeks. You already have a PhD from a top-tier university. Your reputation in the industry is rock solid. You have money, you have status, you have me. What does Tessa have? Zoe stared at him, genuinely marveling at the sheer, delusional audacity of his logic. She has a bachelor's degree. She barely passed Tristan. Exactly, she's struggling, she's young, she's innocent, and she's trying to build a career in a cutthroat field. She works so hard, Zoe, Tristan said, his voice actually softening with misguided affection. She stays late just organizing files. The board won't care who the lead inventor is as long as the patent is secured. But for Tessa, having a primary authorship on a breakthrough like this, it's a golden ticket. It will open doors for her. You are giving away my intellectual property to build her a resume, Zoe said flatly. Here is a terrifyingly accurate masterclass in modern gaslighting. Tristan attempts to launder his infidelity through the noble guise of female empowerment. He demands Zoe surrender her intellectual property to decorate his mistress's resume, then tries to shame her for failing to support a junior female scientist. It's breathtakingly vile, but watch Zoe's pivot. She doesn't defend her PhD, she doesn't scream at Tessa. She realizes that fighting a mediocre man over a piece of paper is beneath her weight class. So she rips up the paper and quietly packs the raw data. You cannot build a biotech kingdom on stolen blueprints and good intentions. She let him keep the paper crown, but she walked out with the entire treasury. Tristan let out a sharp, exasperated sigh. Stop being so selfish. I'm doing this because I feel responsible for her. I'm the CEO. It's my job to elevate my team. I thought you, of all people, would understand that giving a hand up to a junior female scientist was the right thing to do. Instead, you're acting like a jealous, insecure teenager over a technicality. There it was. He was weaponizing feminism against her to justify his infidelity and theft. He was trying to rob her blind, all while painting himself as the noble mentor and her as the bitter. Aging fiancé Zoe looked down at the paper again. The anger she had felt the night before, the anger of a woman betrayed by her partner, evaporated completely, replaced by the chilling, calculating instinct of a predator who had just realized their prey was incredibly, fatally stupid. You're right, Tristan, Zoe said softly. Tristan paused, his defensive posture relaxing slightly. A triumphant, self-satisfied smile crept onto his face. See, I knew you'd understand once you looked at the big picture. You're a smart girl, Zoe. Just sign the last page, and we'll get this filed before the weekend. He slid a heavy Mont Blanc pen across the desk toward her. Zoe didn't pick up the pen. Instead, she picked up the patent application. With a sudden, deliberate motion, she tore the thick stack of papers in half. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the quiet office. Tristan jolted forward, his eyes widening in shock. What the hell are you doing? Zoe calmly tore the pieces again, dropping the shredded remains into the sleek metal trash can beside his desk. I'm not signing it, Tristan. And more importantly, I'm pulling all my encrypted data sets from the server. Without my raw data, this patent is worthless. You can't file it. Tristan shot up from his chair, his face flushing dark red. You can't do that. That data belongs to the company. No, Tristan, Zoe corrected him, her voice lethal. The data belongs to the primary researcher until a formal intellectual property transfer is signed. A transfer I have deliberately delayed signing for the last 6 months. It's my data, and I'm taking it. She turned on her heel and walked toward the door. "Zoe, stop! Are you out of your mind?" Tristan shouted, scrambling around his desk to grab her arm. Before his fingers could touch her sleeve, Zoe spun around, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made him physically recoil. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed with absolute finality. "And don't ever speak to me again unless it's through my lawyers." "We're done, Tristan. The wedding is off. The partnership is dissolved. You can keep your little intern, but you will not keep my life's work." She walked out of his office, the glass door clicking shut behind her. The bullpen outside was dead silent. Every single researcher, including Mark and Tessa, had heard the raised voices. They were all staring at Zoe, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Tessa was standing by her desk, a look of manufactured terror on her pretty face. "Zoe, oh my God, what happened? Are you okay?" she gasped, taking a tentative step forward. "Did Tristan do something wrong? Please don't be mad at him." It was a brilliant performance, the concerned, innocent bystander. Zoe paused by her desk, grabbing her sleek silver laptop and slipping it into her designer tote bag. She looked at Tessa, taking in the trembling lip and the wide, teary eyes. A slow, terrifyingly serene smile spread across Zoe's face. "Oh, Tessa, I'm not mad at him, actually. You can have him and the mortgage and his mother." Tessa blinked, momentarily dropping her act. "What?" Zoe didn't bother explaining. She looked around the silent lab, making eye contact with every single colleague who had snickered at her the night before. They all quickly looked down at their keyboards. She walked out of the double glass doors, her stilettos clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor, leaving behind a toxic wasteland of mediocrity. 10 minutes later, Zoe was sitting in a quiet, upscale cafe 3 blocks from the office. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a sharp, focused energy. She opened her phone. No messages from Tristan. He was probably scrambling to access her encrypted files, only to find a digital firewall he could never breach. She opened her contacts and scrolled past the wedding planner, the florist, and her furious ex-fiancé. She stopped on a name she hadn't texted in 6 months, Julian Vance. Julian wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of rich that moved markets. A former high-ranking military intelligence officer who had transitioned into the private sector, founding the country's most elite cybersecurity and defense contracting firm. He was ruthless, notoriously private, and dangerously intelligent. He was also the man who, 6 months ago at a high society charity gala, had quietly pulled Zoe aside after watching Tristan publicly take credit for her research during a keynote speech. "You're the architect of his empire, Dr. Hastings," Julian had murmured, swirling an expensive scotch, his dark eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. "Why are you letting a man with half your intellect play king? If you ever get tired of building castles for mediocre men, let me know. I have a proposal for you." Zoe had brushed him off, offended on Tristan's behalf. She had believed in love then. She believed in loyalty. Now, sitting in the cafe, she tapped his name. "Is your proposal still on the table?" The reply came less than 10 seconds later. "Send me your location." Zoe smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile. She ordered a black coffee and waited. Less than 5 minutes later, a sleek, armored black SUV glided to a halt at the curb outside the cafe. The tinted back door opened, and Julian Vance stepped out. He was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that screamed old money and absolute authority. His features were sharp, his jawline clenched, and his dark eyes swept the cafe before locking onto Zoe. He didn't look like a man arriving for a casual coffee date. He looked like a predator arriving to claim his territory. Julian walked over to her table, pulling out the chair opposite her without asking. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He didn't ask how she was. He simply looked at her, his gaze intense enough to strip away all the polite armor she was wearing. "You're not crying," Julian observed, his deep voice a low rumble. "I don't have time to cry, Julian," Zoe said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I need a lawyer. I need to secure my patents, and I need a very public distraction." Julian's lips twitched upward into a ghost of a smirk. He leaned back in his chair, crossing one long leg over the other. "The patents are easy. I have the best IP litigators in the country on retainer. They can bankrupt his little startup by Friday." "And the distraction?" Zoe asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's where my proposal comes in," Julian said quietly, leaning forward, the playful arrogance vanishing from his eyes. "My board of directors is pushing me to settle down. A stability clause in my founding contract. I need a wife, Zoe, an intelligent, unshakable partner who won't crumble under the pressure of my world." He held her gaze, the air between them suddenly thick with an unspoken electric tension. "I hear you have a wedding booked in exactly 4 weeks," Julian continued smoothly. "The venue is paid for, the guests are invited. It would be a shame to waste all that expensive catering." Zoe stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. She stared at the billionaire sitting across from her, realizing the sheer, magnificent insanity of what he was suggesting. "Are you suggesting we hijack my wedding, Julian?" Zoe asked, her voice hushed. Julian smiled, a slow, predatory, devastating smile. "I'm suggesting, Zoe," he said, his voice a low, commanding purr, "that we show Tristan exactly what happens when you try to steal from an architect. We don't just cancel his wedding, we replace him." The sheer audacity of Julian's proposal hung in the air, thick and intoxicating. It wasn't just a business transaction, it was a declaration of total, uncompromising war. Zoe stared at the man sitting across from her. Julian Vance wasn't a man who made impulsive decisions. Every move he made, from his hostile corporate takeovers to his meticulously tailored suits, was calculated with the precision of a sniper. He didn't want a weeping, broken woman to save. He wanted a partner who understood the assignment. And right now, the assignment was absolute annihilation. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across Zoe's face, the lingering ghost of the 7 years she had wasted on Tristan completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, thrilling adrenaline. "You're out of your mind, Julian," Zoe said softly, leaning forward. Julian's dark eyes locked onto hers, entirely devoid of humor. "I am entirely serious, Zoe. You need to secure your patents, protect your real estate from his greedy mother, and you want to watch his ego shatter. I need a wife to satisfy a billionaire board of directors. We both get exactly what we want, and Tristan gets the public execution he deserves." He reached into the breast pocket of his suit and withdrew a sleek silver business card, sliding it across the table. It wasn't his company card. It was the direct line to his private legal counsel. "Call this number. They will have a bulletproof prenuptial agreement and an intellectual property injunction drafted by noon tomorrow," Julian instructed, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "You keep your assets, I keep mine. We share the power, and the wedding goes ahead exactly as planned, down to the last orchid." Zoe picked up the card, her fingers tracing the embossed silver lettering. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for time to think about it. 4 weeks, Zoe agreed, her voice steady and clear. "We get married in exactly 4 weeks. But Julian, I want to be the one to press the button. I want to watch his world burn." Julian's lips twitched upward into a devastatingly handsome, predatory smirk. I wouldn't have it any other way, Mrs. Vance. The next 4 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. To the outside world, and specifically to Tristan, Zoe had simply vanished. She had blocked his number, blocked Brenda's number, and moved her belongings out of their shared apartment while he was at work. She didn't send a dramatic breakup text. She didn't demand closure. She simply ceased to exist in his orbit. Tristan predictably spun the narrative to his advantage. He told the lab and their mutual friends that Zoe was having a nervous breakdown over the stress of the wedding. He claimed she was being unreasonable and overly emotional about a simple patent dispute. She just needs time to cool off, Tristan had told Mark, the sycophantic senior researcher, loudly enough for the whole bullpen to hear. She'll come back. She always does. In the meantime, Tessa, I need you to step up and handle the data analysis. We can't let Zoe's little tantrum slow down our Series B funding. Tessa had nodded earnestly, her doe eyes wide with manufactured sympathy. Of course, Tristan. I'll do whatever it takes to support you, poor Zoe. She must be so exhausted. But behind the scenes, Tristan was panicking. He couldn't access Zoe's encrypted servers. Without her raw data, the breakthrough protein sequence patent was essentially a blank piece of paper. He had tried hiring external IT consultants to crack her passwords. But Zoe's security protocols were ironclad. He was bleeding money, stalling investors, and losing sleep. And yet, his ego refused to believe she was actually gone. He convinced himself that the silence was a tactic, a feminine manipulation to make him apologize. He was certain that on the day of the wedding, she would be waiting at the altar, desperate for his forgiveness. To cope with the stress, Tristan decided he deserved a break. 2 weeks before the wedding, he booked a crucial networking trip to a biotech conference in Geneva. Naturally, he brought his lead inventor, Tessa, along for the ride. While Tristan and Tessa were sipping champagne in a first-class cabin over the Atlantic, Zoe was sitting in the penthouse suite of Julian's corporate headquarters, surrounded by a team of elite lawyers, financial advisors, and wedding planners. She looked absolutely radiant. The stress lines around her eyes had vanished. She was wearing a perfectly tailored white silk blouse and high-waisted trousers, looking less like a distressed bride and more like a CEO preparing for an IPO. Julian sat at the head of the massive mahogany conference table, nursing a glass of scotch, watching her with an intense, quiet fascination. He had given her a blank check and absolute authority over the wedding details. He didn't care about the flowers or the menu. He only cared about the execution of the plan. The injunction against Tristan's startup is ready to be filed, Miss Hastings, the lead IP litigator, a shark-eyed woman named Sarah, announced, sliding a thick legal binder toward Zoe. The moment he attempts to pitch that patent to his European investors, we hit him with a federal cease and desist for corporate espionage. He'll be radioactive. Zoe signed the document with a flourish. Excellent. Hold the filing until the day of the wedding. I want maximum collateral damage. Julian chuckled, a low rumbling sound that sent an unexpected shiver down Zoe's spine. He stood up, walking over to her chair, his tall frame casting a protective shadow over her. Remind me never to cross you, Zoe, Julian murmured, leaning down so his lips were mere inches from her ear. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, was intoxicating. Before Zoe could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. It was an audio message from an unknown number, but she recognized the area code. Geneva. Zoe tapped the play button. The audio was slightly muffled, the unmistakable sound of a crowded hotel bar in the background. Zoe, Oh, hi, Tessa's high-pitched, breathless voice filled the quiet boardroom. I know you're probably super busy stressing over the catering or whatever, but I just wanted to tell you not to worry about Tristan. He's really relaxing on this trip. A deliberate pause, followed by a soft, mocking giggle. We're having a late dinner right now. He's been telling me how exhausting you can be, always acting like his boss instead of his partner. He just wants someone to, appreciate him. I just thought, woman to woman, you should know that you can't buy his love with your little patents. See you at the wedding. The audio cut off. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Julian's jaw clenched, a dangerous, lethal glint flashing in his dark eyes. He reached out, his large hand gently covering Zoe's, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a silent promise of violence. Zoe didn't look angry, she didn't look hurt. She looked at her phone, then looked up at Julian, a slow, predatory smile curving her lips. Julian, Zoe said softly, her voice smooth as silk. Call your security team. I want the surveillance footage from the hallway of the Four Seasons in Geneva for the last 48 hours. Let's see exactly how much relaxing he's doing. Julian's smirk returned, dark and devastating. He pulled his phone from his pocket. Consider it done, future Mrs. Vance. The morning of the wedding arrived, crisp, clear, and utterly merciless. Tristan woke up with a pounding hangover in a luxury hotel suite that he had charged to the company credit card. He rolled over, his arm tangling in the expensive sheets, brushing against Tessa's bare shoulder. He groaned, rubbing his temples, and grabbed his phone from the nightstand. He froze. It was 1 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. at the historic Grand Plaza Hotel. Across town, panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his arrogant delusion. He sat bolt upright, shoving Tessa away. "Tessa, wake up, we're late!" he yelled, stumbling out of bed and scrambling for his discarded tuxedo pants. He grabbed his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, dialing Zoe's number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. He threw the phone onto the bed, swearing violently. Where the hell was she? Why hadn't she called him screaming? Why wasn't his mother blowing up his phone? "Tristan, what's wrong?" Tessa mumbled, sitting up, pulling the sheet over her chest, looking genuinely confused. "I'm getting married in an hour, Tessa. That's what's wrong," Tristan snapped, struggling with his cufflinks, his face pale with panic. "Get dressed. I have to go." He didn't wait for her. He sprinted out of the suite, his bow tie undone, his hair a mess, leaving his innocent intern sitting alone in a wrecked hotel bed. He flagged down a cab outside the hotel, screaming at the driver to run every red light. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had assumed Zoe would just be there. She always was. She handled the logistics. She handled the crises. She was the anchor to his soaring balloon. He pulled up to the Grand Plaza Hotel at exactly 1:55 p.m. The valet stared at his disheveled appearance as he threw a $100 bill at him and sprinted up the marble steps. He burst through the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom, gasping for air, expecting to see a room full of furious guests and a weeping bride in white. Instead, Tristan stopped dead in his tracks. The ballroom was breathtaking, cascading orchids draped from crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful, elegant melody. The lighting was perfect, moody, and expensive. But half the chairs were empty. The only people sitting in the velvet chairs were Tristan's family, including his scowling mother, Brenda, and a dozen of the most critical angel investors for his biotech startup. The investors he had practically begged to attend to prove his stability. None of Zoe's family was there, none of her friends. Tristan stood at the back of the aisle, confusion and dread pooling in his stomach. "Mom, what's going on? Where is Zoe?" he rasped, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. Brenda stood up, her face a mask of furious embarrassment. "I don't know, Tristan. We've been sitting here for an hour. She won't answer her phone. I told you she was unstable. I told you not to marry a woman who wouldn't sign a simple trust document." Before Tristan could respond, the elegant string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The lights in the ballroom dimmed completely, plunging the room into near darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Then, the massive state of the art projection screens flanking the altar flickered to life. The screens didn't show a slideshow of romantic photos. They showed a live video feed from a private suite somewhere high above the ballroom. And there she was, Zoe. She looked utterly flawless. She wasn't wearing a traditional, puffy white gown. She wore a sleek, architectural ivory silk dress that hugged her curves, radiating power and untouchable elegance. Her dark hair was swept up, and a diamond necklace worth more than Tristan's entire company glittered at her throat. But it wasn't her appearance that made Tristan's blood run cold. It was the man standing next to her. Julian Vance, the billionaire, the apex predator of the corporate world. He was dressed in a pristine black tuxedo, his arm wrapped possessively around Zoe's waist, looking down at the camera with an expression of absolute, terrifying amusement. Zoe looked directly into the lens, a slow, chilling smile curving her lips. Her voice, amplified by the ballroom's surround sound system, echoed with crystal clarity. "Good afternoon, Tristan. Good afternoon, Brenda. And a special welcome to the investors of Apex Biotech," Zoe said smoothly. Tristan's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Zoe, what are you doing?" "I'm doing exactly what a smart woman does when she discovers a toxic variable in her environment," Zoe replied, her voice echoing like a judge handing down a sentence. "I'm isolating it and eradicating it." She turned slightly, looking up at Julian. He smiled, pressing a gentle, undeniable kiss to her temple. "I'd like to introduce my husband, Julian Vance," Zoe announced, the words dropping like a nuclear bomb into the silent ballroom. "We were married an hour ago in a private ceremony. This reception isn't for us. It's for you, Tristan." Brenda shrieked from the front row. "You bitch! You stole our deposit! You ruined his life!" Zoe didn't even blink. She held up a small remote control. "No, Brenda," Zoe said softly. "He ruined his own life. I'm just providing the documentation." She pressed the button. The massive screens above the altar snapped instantly from Zoe and Julian's serene faces to a stark black background. A waveform audio graphic pulsed in the center of the display. The ballroom, filled with Tristan's most crucial angel investors, business partners, and mortified family members, held its collective breath. Then, Brenda's shrill, unmistakable voice blasted through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. "Since you two are moving into the new house in the suburbs, after the wedding, the condo is just going to sit there collecting dust. You need to put it into the family trust, specifically under his brother's name." A shocked murmur rippled through the pews. Investors exchanged tight, uncomfortable glances. Tristan's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. He spun toward his mother, who had frozen in the front row, her mouth hanging open in horror. The audio continued, amplifying Brenda's greed for everyone to hear. "If you don't do this, there will be no wedding. Turn it off." Brenda screeched, scrambling out of her seat and wildly waving her arms at the empty altar. "That's private. You can't do this." But Zoe wasn't finished. The audio faded, replaced immediately by the crisp, high-definition security footage. Julian's team had extracted from the Four Seasons Hotel in Geneva. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 a.m., exactly 48 hours ago. The video showed a dimly lit, luxurious hotel corridor. Tristan stumbled into the frame, his tie loose, laughing loudly. Clinging to his arm, wearing a dress that barely covered her thighs, was Tessa. The investors from Apex Biotech, the people Tristan had sworn were funding a visionary, stable, family-oriented CEO, watched in absolute silence as Tristan pinned his 24-year-old intern against the wall of the corridor. He kissed her hungrily, his hands roaming freely, entirely unconcerned about the security cameras. When they finally broke apart, Tessa giggled, leaning her head against his chest. "Are you sure Zoe isn't going to freak out about the patent?" Tessa's voice, clear as day, echoed from the hidden microphone on the camera. Tristan threw his head back and laughed. An arrogant, dismissive sound that made several women in the audience visibly recoil in disgust. "Zoe? She's too obsessed with me to leave," Tristan sneered on the recording, fumbling with his room key. "She's practically 30. She's desperate to get married. I can give you the patent, and she'll still be waiting at the altar to pay for my catering. She's smart, Tessa, but she's pathetic when it comes to me." The video froze on his smug, drunken face. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. It was the silence of a man's reputation, his career and his entire life disintegrating into dust. Tristan stood at the back of the aisle, his hands trembling violently. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He looked at the investors, the men and women who held the purse strings to his Series B funding. They weren't looking at him with pity. They were looking at him with utter contempt. The lead investor, a stern, silver-haired woman named Margaret, stood up slowly. She buttoned her designer blazer, her expression hard as granite. "Tristan," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "You pitched us a company built on Dr. Hastings' brilliant research. You assured us the intellectual property was secure and ethically managed. What we just saw is a liability, a grotesque, unethical liability. Margaret, please, it's not what it looks like. She manipulated that footage," Tristan stammered, his voice cracking in panic. He took a desperate step forward, practically begging. "She's just a jealous, hysterical ex. I can explain." Margaret didn't even blink. She picked up her expensive leather tote bag. "There is nothing to explain. You lack judgment. You lack integrity. And clearly, you lack the intellectual property you tried to sell us. Consider our term sheet revoked. We are pulling our funding immediately." She turned on her heel and walked down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Like a dam breaking, the rest of the investors stood up in unison, murmuring their disgust, and followed Margaret out the door. None of them looked at Tristan as they passed him. They treated him like a bad smell. "Wait, stop! You can't do this!" Tristan screamed, lunging toward the departing crowd, but a sharp, authoritative voice stopped him in his tracks. The live feed on the screens blinked back to Zoe and Julian. Zoe was leaning against Julian's broad chest, a look of profound, chilling indifference on her face. Julian was swirling a glass of amber liquid, looking down at Tristan like a lion observing a wounded gazelle. "Oh, they can, Tristan," Zoe said smoothly. "And they should, because, as of this morning, I have officially filed a federal injunction against Apex Biotech for the theft of my proprietary research data. Without my biological sequence, your patent application is fraudulent." Tristan fell to his knees in the middle of the flower-strewn aisle. He couldn't breathe. His startup was dead. His funding was gone. His reputation in the biotech industry was annihilated. "You ruined me," Tristan sobbed, slamming his fists onto the plush carpet. "You vindictive bitch, you ruined my life over a stupid kiss." "I didn't ruin you, Tristan," Zoe corrected him softly, her voice devoid of any anger. "I just stopped building your castles. You ruined yourself the moment you decided I was a resource to be exploited rather than a partner to be respected." She reached up, her fingers grazing the sparkling diamond necklace Julian had clasped around her throat that morning. "You said you couldn't marry me, Tristan," Zoe smiled, a genuine radiant smile. "But you wanted to give Tessa your devotion. Now you have all the time in the world to do just that. Enjoy the catering. It's the last thing I'll ever pay for." The screen abruptly went black. The feed was cut. Tristan remained on his knees in the dimly lit ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of a wedding that was never his. His mother, Brenda, was sobbing hysterically in the front row, clutching her chest. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a resounding thud. Tristan jumped, whipping his head around, a pathetic glimmer of hope lighting up his eyes. Maybe it was Zoe coming back to gloat. Maybe it was an investor giving him a second chance. It was neither. A team of 6 men dressed in impeccable, razor-sharp charcoal suits marched into the room. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision. They weren't hotel security. They were Julian Vance's elite corporate legal team. The lead attorney, a tall, imposing man with ice blue eyes, stopped right in front of the kneeling Tristan. He didn't offer a hand to help him up. He simply looked down at him with professional disdain. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, intimidating stack of legal documents bound in heavy stock paper. "Tristan Davis?" the attorney asked, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Tristan stared up at the man, his eyes wide, his throat dry. "Yes." The attorney dropped the heavy stack of papers directly onto Tristan's lap. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. "You are being served," the attorney announced, his voice echoing in the empty, silent ballroom. "On behalf of Dr. Zoe Hastings and Vance Industries, this is a federal lawsuit for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. Your personal and corporate assets have been frozen pending investigation." The attorney didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, his team following silently behind him. Tristan sat there on the floor, clutching the lawsuit that would bankrupt him, staring at the empty, darkened screens. He had thought he was the visionary. He thought he was the mastermind juggling 2 women, playing God with their careers and their hearts. But as the reality of his total destruction set in, he realized a terrifying truth. He wasn't the player in this game. He was just a pawn. And he had never even seen the real architect coming. 6 months had passed since the Grand Plaza Hotel incident. The name Tristan Davis had vanished entirely from the Silicon Valley biotech scene, replaced by a cautionary tale of a mediocre CEO who had tried to steal from the wrong woman. The federal lawsuit filed by Vance Industries' legal team had been swift, brutal, and entirely unmerciful. With Zoe's encrypted data securely in her possession, Tristan's patent application was exposed as a fraudulent house of cards. His startup, Apex Biotech, hemorrhaged its remaining capital on legal fees before inevitably filing for bankruptcy. The colleagues who had snickered at Zoe in the break room, the sycophants who had enabled Tristan's gaslighting, found themselves unemployed and blacklisted from major research firms and Tessa. The moment Tristan's corporate credit cards were declined at a luxury boutique, the innocent, devoted intern had packed her designer bags and vanished. Rumor had it she was currently an assistant for an aging real estate developer in Miami, utilizing her unique skill set elsewhere. Tristan was currently living in his mother's cramped suburban basement, working part-time at a local electronics store, drowning in legal debt, and watching his deadbeat brother, Tommy, play video games all day. He had lost everything. Meanwhile, high above the chaotic streets of San Francisco, the sun was setting over the San Francisco Bay, casting a warm golden glow across the floor-to-ceiling windows of a sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse. Zoe stood by the glass, holding a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. She wore a simple, elegant silk slip dress, her dark hair falling in soft waves down her back. She looked radiant, powerful, and completely at peace. She had just been named the chief scientific officer of a newly formed, incredibly well-funded biotech subsidiary under the Vance Industries umbrella. She had full creative control, an elite team of researchers who respected her, and a proprietary lab that Tristan could only have dreamed of. She took a slow sip of her water, watching the city lights flicker to life. The scars of the 7 years she had wasted on Tristan had healed, leaving behind a sharp, impenetrable armor. She hadn't just survived the betrayal, she had weaponized it. The soft hum of the private elevator opening broke the silence of the penthouse. Zoe turned as Julian Vance stepped into the foyer. He looked immaculate, as always, in a bespoke navy suit, though he had discarded his tie somewhere between the boardroom and home. He didn't head for his study or the bar. He walked straight towards Zoe, his dark eyes fixed on her with that familiar, intense hunger that still sent a thrill down her spine. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his solid chest. He pressed a warm, lingering kiss to the curve of her neck, inhaling her subtle perfume. "You are home early," Zoe murmured, leaning into his embrace, her hands resting over his. "The board meeting ended early. I had better places to be," Julian replied, his voice a low, gravelly hum against her skin. "How was your day, Dr. Vance? Productive? The new protein sequencing trials are exceeding expectations. We're 6 months ahead of schedule," Zoe said, a proud smile touching her lips. Julian chuckled softly. "I never doubted you for a second, Zoe. You are brilliant." He turned her around gently, his large hands resting on her hips. He looked down at her, his expression softening into something entirely unguarded. The ruthless billionaire who terrified boardrooms disappeared when he looked at his wife. They had entered this marriage as a transaction, a mutually beneficial arrangement of power and vengeance. But over the last 6 months, living in the same space, sharing late-night conversations over scotch and strategy, the lines had blurred. Zoe had expected a cold, calculating roommate. Instead, she found a man who listened to her theories for hours, who anticipated her needs before she voiced them, and who defended her brilliance with terrifying ferocity. She found an equal. "Julian," Zoe started, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. She reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "I need to ask you something." Julian's eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of guarded caution passing through them. "Ask me anything." Zoe stepped back just enough to look him fully in the eye. "I was reviewing the HR files for my new lab team today. Background checks, security clearances, the standard procedure your firm requires." Julian remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "And I found a discrepancy in an old file from Apex Biotech," Zoe said softly, her gaze piercing. "Tessa Jenkins." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact. He simply waited. "Tessa's resume was flagged during her initial hiring at Apex," Zoe continued, her voice steady. "She failed the primary technical assessment, But a week later, her application was mysteriously pushed through with a glowing recommendation from an anonymous, high-level corporate headhunter. Zoe took a step closer to her husband. I traced the IP address of that recommendation, Julian. It bounced through 3 proxy servers before landing on a secure network owned by Vance Intelligence Services. The silence in the penthouse was thick, charged with an electric, dangerous energy. Zoe wasn't angry. She wasn't accusing him of an affair. She was a scientist who had just discovered the final piece of a complex, beautiful puzzle. You placed her there, didn't you? Zoe asked, her voice a hushed whisper of awe and realization. You put Tessa in Tristan's lab. You knew exactly what kind of man he was, and you gave him exactly what his fragile ego craved. Julian looked down at his brilliant, unshakable wife. A slow, devastatingly handsome smirk spread across his face. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. I told you 6 months ago, Zoe. I watched you building castles for a mediocre man. It made me furious. You were wasting your light on a man who only wanted to keep you in the dark. Julian's voice dropped, vibrating with a dark, possessive intensity. I am an intelligence officer, Zoe. My job is to identify vulnerabilities and exploit them. Tristan Davis was a walking vulnerability. He was arrogant, insecure, and deeply unfaithful. I didn't force him to cheat. I didn't force him to try and steal your patent. I just introduced a variable into his environment. You handed him the shovel, Zoe whispered, her eyes wide with a thrilling realization. Society expects Zoe to be horrified here. As an audience, we are trained to want the heroine to clutch her pearls, slap the billionaire, and run away crying about manipulation. Please, Zoe is a scientist. She appreciates a perfectly executed stress test. Julian introduced a variable, but Tristan made the conscious choice to fail the exam. A fragile woman relies on a man to hide his flaws so she can stay comfortable in her delusion. A formidable woman prefers the blindfold removed, even if the light burns, so she can see the board clearly. Julian didn't steal her autonomy. He simply handed her the scalpel to excise a tumor she hadn't fully recognized. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a corporate merger of 2 apex predators, and frankly, it is magnificent. And he eagerly dug his own grave. Julian finished smoothly. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. I wanted you, Zoe. From the moment I saw you standing in the rain outside that gala, arguing with a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. But you were fiercely loyal. You wouldn't have left him if I just asked. Julian's hand slid to her waist, pulling her flush against him. So I showed you who he really was. I expedited the inevitable. I tore down his little empire so I could offer you mine. It was a confession of absolute, terrifying manipulation. A lesser woman would have been horrified. A fragile woman would have run. But Zoe wasn't fragile. She was a woman who had spent 7 years being gaslit and underestimated. She had fought tooth and nail for every ounce of her success, only to have it almost stolen by a man who claimed to love her. Julian hadn't stolen anything from her. He had systematically destroyed the parasite feeding off her brilliance, clearing the path for her to reign supreme. He had orchestrated a masterpiece of vengeance entirely for her benefit. He was a monster, perhaps, but he was her monster. Zoe looked up into the dark, obsessive eyes of the man who had burned down a city just to pull her from the ashes. A slow, brilliant smile broke across her face. It was the smile of a queen acknowledging her king. She reached up, tangling her fingers in the soft hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled his face down to hers. You are absolutely ruthless, Julian Vance. Zoe murmured against his lips, her voice vibrating with dark amusement and profound affection. "Only for you, Mrs. Vance," Julian growled softly, capturing her lips in a deep, consuming kiss. "Only for you." The sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the city into twilight. High above the ruins of Tristan Davis's shattered life, the true architect of fate held his prize, knowing with absolute certainty that the empire they were building together would never fall. Let's deconstruct the architect's curse. For 7 years, Zoe subsidized a man's fragile ego with her intellect and her bank account. We see this constantly in our circles, don't we? Brilliant, self-sufficient women shrinking themselves to fit neatly into the narrative of a man who requires a pedestal. Tristan didn't actually want a partner. He wanted a highly functional, self-funding executive assistant who would gracefully refuse to outshine him in public. When he posted that hidden photo of his intern, he wasn't just hiding an affair. He was hiding his own crushing mediocrity. He desperately needed someone who looked at him like a god because he knew, deep down, Zoe looked at him like a peer. And for an insecure man, equality feels like a personal insult. Here is the cold, hard baseline truth. You cannot fund a man's potential and expect him to respect the bank. The moment you become his permanent safety net, he will inevitably start looking for a trampoline. But Zoe's retaliation is nothing short of surgical. She doesn't play the scorned woman crying in a hotel lobby. She hits him where he actually values himself, his wallet, his industry reputation, and his precious cap table. She didn't just take her intellectual property back. She hosted a live-streamed autopsy of his corporate career. And as for Julian, yes, his methods are entirely morally gray, but he understood one fundamental rule of high-value partnerships. You do not ask an architect to lay bricks. You clear the land, hand her the deed, and ask her what she wants to build. So, my question for you tonight, ladies. Have you ever found yourself quietly ghostwriting a man's success, only to realize he was trying to pass off the rough draft to someone else? When did you finally stop packing his parachutes and let gravity do its job? Grab a seat in the comments and drop your receipts. I read every single one, Madam Read Out.